So this is our first chat for world literature this summer. And I will always try to chat live, but if someone doesn't show up, then I will probably still record a recording. So some of these may end up having no people involved in the discussion except for me, but others may have students involved if they show up. So either way, I want to make sure that I cover all of the literature that we do. So if there is even something where we haven't gone through the entire work with the live sessions, I will always add another recording or extend a recording so that I can make sure and cover all of the literature. So I want you to read it for yourself and then answer the questions for the journals as best as you can. Except I also not only read the journals, and look at your questions, because I want to see that you're understanding what's going on, but I will also reply to those journals and give you any clarification that you need. Journals are a great way too for you to ask questions. So if there are passages that make no sense, then it's really a good thing to ask a question about it, because then I can help you with those particular things. We're reading pretty ancient literature, some of the oldest works that have been written in any language. And so, of course, there are going to be some issues with understanding, comprehension, even, with different rules about theater or rules about writing or different expectations culturally. So I'm going to try to cover as much of that as I can so that we understand what's going on. You understand very well what's going on so that when you take a test, you're not still lost. If you watch a video, however, and at any point you have questions, you need to do what you can to get those questions to me. If you've already filled out a journal, that is perfectly okay. You can always email me. Just email me, use the course mail in the Blackboard shell, and send it to me and say, I have questions still after the videos. I still want to know this, this, and this, and this. List out your questions, and I will literally write you back and answer each one of those questions. But I'll try to cover as much as I can here in the recording. So if you are here at any point, obviously it's going to benefit you because you can ask questions live. And even if you ask a question, I don't require you to use any sort of video. So I'm not watching to see if you're staring at the computer the entire time that you're in a WebEx session with me. But I also will be really cautious. You can ask me questions in chat. You can turn on your microphone and ask a question. But again, you don't have to turn on your microphone. Even using the text chat is fine. And any questions that you enter in the chat, I will try to answer. I'll also enter some words or terms or phrasing or anything that I use that I feel needs spelling out. I'll put that in the chat. And that actually is part of the recording. So you should be able to access that when you're watching the recording on YouTube. Anyway, but let's start a little bit with the play we're starting with is Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex. Rex just means king. But in this particular translation, it's Oedipus, King of Thebes. And this is actually translated by a professor of Greek at Oxford. About a little over 100 years ago, he actually translated this. So there's a little archaic language, but the truth is this kind of a play is very formal compared to movies that we would watch, for instance. Movies tend to be very realistic. They have very realistic sound effects and visual effects, very realistic costumes and makeup and all these other things. That is not the way that theater in ancient Greece would have been. In fact, most theater at that time was going to be very formalistic. It's going to have people who speak very loudly and broadly and unrealistically. And it was all done in an outside theater, and often it was hard to hear. So they even would wear masks that would project their voices. So they often had a rounded shape around their mouth so that they're kind of like a megaphone. The cheerleaders use those big megaphones. Well, they would use those to project their voice farther. And so the masks were very much indicative of whatever character they were playing. And the women and men, all of the children, anybody in here would have been played by men. So even Jocasta, who's the queen of Thebes, married to Oedipus, she would have been played by a man wearing a mask that is meant to look like a woman's. And so I just wanted to keep that in mind. I do have, and what I can do, I'm flipping over to it, but I'm just going to take this web address. So if you want to see more of this live session, it's really weird. And honestly, we would find it very off-putting. But if you want to use that link with the chat and view this longer, you'll probably recognize it if you do Oedipus. I did Oedipus Rex play performance, and it's one of the top things that's always listed. But this is a really good thing to watch if you want to get a sense for how things would have been staged. Now, there would have been no lighting. The performances would have happened during the day so that they had sunshine. And people would have come with their picnic lunches, and whole families would have come to these play festivals. And they were very ritualistic. So there were often several plays in a row. This Oedipus the King is actually the first of a trilogy of plays by Sophocles. And so this starts with, it really starts well before the play happens, because we have a lot of backstory. Now, most of you, if you have no background in Greek mythology, would not know the backstory of this. We've probably heard of the Oedipus complex. And I'll write this in here. There's also an Electra complex, but that's based on a different set of plays and a different person in Greek history. But the Oedipus complex it's a Freudian term. Sigmund Freud came up with it. And it was this stage in a person's development a boy's development when he identifies very strongly with his mom and wants to marry her. That's when kids go, I want to marry you, to some adult. But it's his mom is the best woman ever. And he hates his dad, and he sees himself as a rival with his dad for his mom's affection. So it's an Oedipal thing. That's what I mean. So that's what Freud came up with. I don't know how much it really holds true at all. But in this case, it's based on this Greek myth. And it's a story that at that time, during when these audience would have watched these plays, they all would have known this story. So it's kind of like, it's probably the closest we get is something like if we were to watch a movie, and they're always coming out with movies based on Cinderella. Well, we all know the premise of Cinderella. We know there's this girl, and she has two mean stepsisters and a mean stepmom, and she's super poor and lives in an attic, but is super sweet and kind. And she goes to this ball that she's not supposed to go to, but she's in disguise wearing this all fancy dress. And even her stepmother and stepsisters don't recognize her. And then she has to leave. Her fairy godmother made it happen, of course, but she has to leave by midnight because everything's going to disappear at midnight. And so the prince falls in love with her. She runs away at midnight. And then he takes this little glass slipper and he finds her, so that the truth is we have these tropes. There's so many movies based on this story, but it's a story we all know. Now, we don't have a ton of plays about Oedipus the King. We don't actually have a ton of plays about any given Greek myth. But what we do have is we have some surviving plays from this era, and a lot of these plays still have meaning for what it means to be a human being. Certainly, it has this. It deals with a lot of ideals about what is our destiny, or how can we choose our fate? Do we have any control over fate? Do we have free will? Those kinds of questions are certainly happening. Well, for the Greeks, this was, yes, it was very formalistic, but they were dealing with ideas about what people can and can't do in their lives. And for them, they did have a very strong religious system. It is a pagan system, which means it's non-Christian, but it's also polytheistic. So and I'll just put polytheistic, which means that it includes many gods instead of just one. So Christianity, for instance, is a monotheistic religion. So is Judaism. So is Islam. But most religions in the world are polytheistic. They believe in more than one God. And many of them believe in many, 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 many gods. So Hinduism, for instance, believes, they have hundreds, if not thousands of deities, big, little, major deities, minor deities, household deities, whatever. So this is a polytheistic system that mostly was based on the Greek gods, but there was definitely an idea, and one set of gods were the fates, three fates, and they were people who essentially they decided when your life was when you were going to be born. They decided, they wove a tapestry with your life threads in it, and they decided when that life would get snipped off. So they just and you can't control that. And for the Greeks, the whole idea of free will made not a whole lot of sense. For them, the Greeks felt that you were you had a destiny, a fate that you were subject to your entire life. And there was nothing you could do to avoid it. In fact, any step you took to avoid what you thought your fate was going to be would send you hurling into that fate. And that's kind of the point of this play, is that even if you're a king, even if you're a hero, even if you're a great person, or you think that, what you're whatever, you're not a god, and you are subject to the laws of fate. And in fact, even the gods are subject to that. If you read the Iliad or the Odyssey, both of them by Homer, although we don't know who he was, um, the Iliad especially deals a lot with battles around the Trojan War, and many of the gods have children fighting. They impregnated a woman or something and have these heroes fighting, including Achilles and a bunch of people. And they cannot control even when their child is going to be killed in battle, because their fate is set. And so they have to, they are subject to what the fates say about their own children. Now they're immortal. That's the big thing with, all the gods, they're going to live forever, but humans don't. And humans often don't have control over their life choices either. And this is absolutely one of the points of Oedipus the King, is that he does not have a choice in what happened or has happened to him. Now, the other thing that's a little weird about this play, well, there are a couple of things. Another thing that happens though is, and let me see if I'm going to push play. And you see that the people are wearing masks, but you see all these crowds around the actors, so there might be a main actor. These are all supplicants, but they are a chorus of voices. And so when we get to the points where something's going to happen, and then we have a scene with Oedipus and stuff like that, and some other actors, then these in between scenes, we have a chorus. Choragus is the leader of the chorus in this particular play, and they chant certain things, prayers to different gods, or questions about what Oedipus is going to do next, things like that. And so that's a very weird, we don't have, I mean, we do have musicals or something, but that's not quite what this is. We don't know whether the words that the chorus came up with were chanted or sung. We just don't know. But they were definitely spoken in unison, if not sung in unison or chanted in unison. And yet they are kind of like a little break between scenes. Now, the vast majority of scenes in Greek plays too, which is unlike the way that it happens today. Almost all of them are only between two actors. So essentially, that's where we get the word dialogue from. It means two speakers. And these thespians, these actors would essentially move, and one would come onto the scene, and the other one's already there, and then they'd speak, and then one leaves and the other one stays there, and then another person walks on, and then it's a new scene because those two people are talking. There are only a couple of times in this whole play when three people are on the set at once and they're all talking. It's extremely rare for that to happen. In fact, there are whole Greek plays where that never happens, where literally there might be more people standing up on the stage, and yet only two people are actually talking back and forth to each other. That's pretty much standard for Greek time. The other thing that they do, and this is something that could definitely be on the test, the Greeks followed what were called the three unities. And they are the unities of time, place, and action. Okay, so the unity of time, well, let's start with the unity of place. So this particular play that you're seeing right here is happening, the action begins on the steps of the palace in Thebes. Oedipus is the king of Thebes, and this is his royal palace. So he comes out to the palace steps and speaks to all the people who are praying and pleading with him for help. Okay. The next scene is on the steps of the palace of Thebes. In fact, we never move. That set, that place is going to be, that's a unity of place. It means that it's always the same set. So from the beginning of the action, from the beginning of the play to the end of the play, the scene does not change. They don't go from, it's not like Mission Impossible where they go from one continent to another continent and then they fly over to this other continent and then they go up a river to this place and then they drive on this windy road over to this place. No, 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 no. In Greek plays, that was not allowed. It just didn't happen. Everything happened. If something was happening in the town center, it stayed in the town center the entire play. There was no skipping around places. So that's what one unity. The other thing that would happen is unity of action, and that means that all of the plot, there were no subplots. You know how they'll have like a series you're watching, and you know that they have the main ideas, you know, the main mystery that happens or something like that, but they also have like side romances and this kind of side stuff going on with somebody and his mom or dad, or they have this, you know, this past that's coming to haunt this other person that most people don't even know about. You know, there's subplots. Well, Greek mythology, you know, Greek plays don't allow subplots. Everything that happens needs to pertain to the overall arc of the story. If it doesn't belong. It needs to get out. Now, that's really odd. You know, you'd think it's pretty simplistic. It's actually not. And what's also interesting is that they have what is called the unity of time, and that's probably the most important one. Typically, the unity of time means that everything from the beginning of the action of the play to the end should happen in real time. The closest we get to something like that is, like, we had the series for a while called 24, where everything that happens in an entire season of the show happens in one day. Literally, each hour of the season is 1 hour of time in 24 hours. And so they run it like the next week, we see the next hour in Jack Bauer's life. Well, that's kind of the way it is here in Oedipus the King, because Oedipus comes in, says, I'm going to find out what's happening. In fact, he says, I've already sent off Creon to the oracle, and he should be coming back any minute now. And all these people have already been sent for. And so in real time, everything is supposed to happen. Now, it's very condensed anyway. At the most, though, for a Greek play, if it's going to follow the unity of time, which they did, it has to at least happen within 24 hours. Even if it's an hour and a half, like this is an hour and a half production, it's an hour and 27 minutes. But it has to happen I mean, ideally, it would be an hour and a half of real time, or at most 1 day. So if it starts at dawn, it should end at dusk, or sometime at night at least. So it shouldn't go over 20, you know, you can't do 5 years later and stuff like that. So many of the movies that we have today, you know, might even have some sort of like prologue, you know, where they show what did happen a long time ago. And now they, you know, or they said 4 months earlier, and then they say present day, and then, you know, 5 years later and stuff like that. Well, that's not allowed in Greek plays. So you know, the unity of time says it has to feel at least like it's happening in real time. Okay, so now these masks are not as the masks that you see here. Let me see if I can go ahead a little bit. These are much more stylized. This is kind of cool though. This is Tiresias. Oh, I have to skip this part. Okay, so this is Tiresias. He's the blind seer, but you can see how stylized their costumes are. The truth is the masks, we don't know that they would have been this good. We do have some mask replicas, and yet the actors really would have been wearing stuff like this. It would have been, you know, long robes, very formal, and very, you know, the masks would have absolutely characterized who are these people. You notice that Oedipus the King, for instance, is wearing a crown on his mask. He's actually got that mask with a crown attached to it. That's part of the mask he's wearing. So, and it would have, the gestures would have been broad like this. So this is a really good thing to watch, because you can see even like the man's wearing gloves to make his fingers more visible. And he's wearing gloves as too. So it's weird and off-putting to us, but it's not realistic drama. That's not what this is. That's not how it goes. So I just wanted to give you that kind of background. The other thing that you can do, and feel free, is if you look up Oedipus the Rex summary, there is a really good, oh, where is it? There we go. Classic summarized, this one right here. And I'll just go ahead. I'm going to pause it. But it's a bit irreverent, but it's fun. And it actually tells you kind of what the overall story is. But you get it, even if you don't know the story, essentially, as you go through the play, it's going to tell you what the story is. It's going to give you background information. And so if you don't know this, if you don't know what really happened that led up to Oedipus and what he really did, and you don't know the myth, this is going to be a shock. And it's part of the tragedy of it, is that it's a shock to audiences who don't know the story. At the same time, it's a shock to Oedipus, because he doesn't know the stories. And so that's what's so fascinating, is that the audience, there's a level of irony here, because much of the audience already knows the story. They know who Oedipus was. They know what he did. They also know at this point he doesn't know that he did it. And so let's set up exactly what happened, because there's a bunch of backstory that will be revealed as we go through, but it's backstory that we just don't know. And it happened many years ago, actually. In fact, Oedipus, if he's like 25 years old, or even if he's 35 years old, 35 years ago is when it really started, or even a little before. Now, Jocasta was already married. So Oedipus is her second husband. Her first husband was Laius. And you can see that right now. The following does not appear in the play, but are frequently mentioned. Laius is the king of Thebes before Oedipus became king. Okay. And Laius and Jocasta were married, and yet they didn't have children yet. And they were told, mostly because Laius was a big jerk, they were told that the gods kind of had it in for them. And if they were to have a child, that child would rise up to essentially kill his dad, Laius, and marry his mom. And they were horrified by that idea. Like, oh my gosh, we can't have children then. Well, of course, that's easy to say, but there was no such thing as birth control, so there's no way, they couldn't really prevent anything. And Jocasta got pregnant. Well, they were horrified, of course, because what did they think? Well, they had actually gone to the oracle at Delphi. And I think it might have, yeah, Apollo is the god over the oracle of Delphi. But the oracle at Delphi was one of the most prestigious and most trusted oracles. So essentially the priestesses of Delphi could predict the future. That was the assumption for the Greeks at the time. Now, so they had been told by the oracle, if you have a kid, he's going to kill Laius, and he's going to, that alone was enough for Laius. He's like, we're not having a kid. Well, of course, Jocasta has a baby. She's pregnant. What are they going to do? So they make plans, and they execute plans that are really terrible. I mean, you don't want to do this to a baby, but they take the baby and they say, well, we don't want to kill it, because you don't kill your own children. That's gross, and the gods wouldn't like that. And so instead, we're going to poke a hole in both of his heels and run a string through it and tie his feet together. And then we're going to have a servant take him and abandon him in the woods where the wolves can eat him, and so somebody else will kill him, essentially, is what the assumption was. Or he'll starve to death, or exposure, or goodness knows what. He's just a baby. It's a horrible thing to do. But they were doing it because they wanted to save themselves, right? Because of what the oracle had said. So the reason Oedipus is called Oedipus is because it means swollen foot. That's actually what it means. Like octopus means 8 foot. So, there's Oedipus, swollen foot. And so he's going to be abandoned in the woods with his feet tied together and all swollen and probably infected. But the servant who has him doesn't want to leave him. And he sees a shepherd a little bit away. Hey, I know you, dude. And he says, would you have any interest in a baby? Because he doesn't, the shepherd doesn't live in Thebes. He'll go to another city state and he'll go and take him and we'll never see the baby again. So he asked this shepherd. Shepherd's like, well, I don't need a kid because I'm just a shepherd. But the king and queen of Corinth, that's the neighboring city state, and they're Polybus and Merope. The king and queen of Corinth don't have children and they would love a baby. They would totally adopt this baby. And so the one servant gives the baby with the swollen feet, poor little Oedipus, to the shepherd. And the shepherd takes him to Polybus and Merope and they raise him as their own kid. They don't tell him that he's adopted, which a lot of parents don't, literally, because they don't want him to, any child to feel like, oh, they're not totally and absolutely loved. And so, sometimes maybe when they're an adult or something, they might say, hey, you're actually not, you're adopted, but they try to hide it. And so for Polybus and Merope, well, they just want to, they love the baby and they love the kid and they love the man and they think he's a sweet dude and he's their kid. So he grows up thinking, well, these are my parents and he's going to be the next king of Corinth. Well, but then he's at a bar and somebody spews at him and says, your parents aren't even your parents and you don't even know. And so Oedipus is really troubled by this comment. He's like, well, so he asks his parents and they deny it completely. So he goes to the oracle at Delphi, same oracle that Laius and Jocasta went to. And they've lived from this point on happily ever after, right? 20 years or whatever, without this. They just think that the son that they abandoned is dead and they escaped their fate. Okay. Well, Oedipus goes to the oracle at Delphi and he asks the oracle, are my mom and dad, are Polybus and Merope my mom and dad? Are they my real parents? And instead of answering, the oracle says, you will kill your father and you'll marry your mother. And he goes, because he's horrified by that. No, wait a second. They don't say, yes, Polybus and Merope are your parents. Instead, they say, you're going to kill your dad and you're going to marry your mom. And he says, no, I'm not going to kill Polybus and I'm not going to marry Merope. And instead of going home to Corinth because he's scared to death that the oracle is right and that it's predicted truth, he runs away from Corinth and he ends up on a crossroads where he meets with a person who's sitting in a litter. Now, a litter is just like a raised chair. And so the person who's like super rich sits in the middle of it and then 4 servants kind of carry him around so he doesn't have to walk. It's it's one of those foo-foo in before we had, access to lots of carriages and stuff like that. A person wouldn't actually walk themselves if they had to go long distances. They'd be carried around by servants. So he's being carried around by servants and he wants Oedipus to move out of the road so that he and his servants can go through first. Now, why does he think that? Well, he's Laius. He is the king of Thebes and he thinks he's super special and better than any wandering young man. And Oedipus doesn't want to move over. And so Laius orders his 4 servants to attack Oedipus and kill him. And Oedipus fights them all off. One guy runs away and then he goes up to Laius and Laius raises his cane and he's going to strike him. And Oedipus kills him too. So Oedipus literally kills 3 servants, 1 runs away, and then kills the king. Now he doesn't know who Laius is. He has no idea that Laius is his dad. And he certainly doesn't know he's a king. He just knew he was a really mean man. And they had a fight and that he was attacked and he fought back and won and killed these people who were all, serving this evil man. Well, then he keeps wandering and he wanders the way that they came from. So he goes back into Thebes where Laius came from. Of course, Laius is dead now. Nobody knows where he is, but they don't know he's dead yet. And so at that time, there's a huge pestilence happening and there's a sphinx that's kind of holding Thebes hostage. And the Sphinx is demanding, they're going to stay and they're going to keep on, treating the people bad, and the people are going to keep suffering until someone can solve the riddle of the Sphinx. And so the Sphinx, essentially Oedipus says, well, I'll solve it, because he's just a young heroic man and he can't go home, so he might as well make a home somewhere else. So he'll do a good deed. And so they ask a quiz. It's one quiz question, and it's a really funny kind of fable. It's like, what animal walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs during the middle of the day, and then 3 legs in the evening? And he says, well, it's man, because he crawls on 4 legs when he's a baby. He walks on 2 legs when he's an adult. And then when he's older, he uses a cane and he walks with 3 legs. And he solves the riddle. The Sphinx goes away. Everybody's happy. The pestilence is all over. No one's suffering anymore. But there's a problem. Well, they have this great heroic man, Oedipus, who saved them. They don't have a king. King's gone. And they find out later, well, he died. He was set upon by robbers on the crossroads. And oh my gosh, he's been murdered. So we need a king. And they ask Oedipus, because he's the hero, can you be king? Would you be willing to be king of Thebes? And Oedipus is like, yeah, because remember, he still can't go home. He thinks if he goes home, he's going to murder Polybus and marry Merope. And that's bad. So he says, no, sure, I'll stay. And they said, well, you're not married, right? And he goes, no, I'm not married. He goes, well, we have this queen who's still pretty. She's older than you, but she's pretty. And she doesn't have a husband anymore because he died. Would you marry her? And he's like, sure, she is pretty. And he marries her, and they have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. And those kids will figure in later plays. In fact, the last play is called Antigone, and that's his daughter, Antigone. It's named after her. So they get married, have a nice coronation or whatever. He becomes king of Thebes, and then they have 4 kids, and he rules. So this is several years after that. Of course, they have the 2 boys I think are older, and the 2 girls are the younger 2. But the boys are, at least in their 15s to 20s. And so they've been there for a while, living happily ever after, and they've been happy. Oedipus and Jocasta make a pretty good couple. Of course, they don't know the truth. Now, Jocasta does not know that she has married her own son. And Oedipus does not know that he has married his mother. They are absolutely ignorant of this. They're just trying to make the best of a bad situation. Okay. Now, Creon is Jocasta's brother. So at the time of this play begins with another pestilence. That's the inciting incident. If you think about, the actual like pyramid plot system. And so all of these supplicants are coming up to the gates of Thebes and up to the palace steps to plead with the king to help them, because people are dying, cows are dying, babies are dying, crops are dying, everything's dying, and they don't know why, and they need the king to help them. So that's why they've come to seek Oedipus and get help from him. So all these suppliants, these men, women, children, again, all masked, all male figures, even if they look like they're, women. And so that's what they're here for. So at the beginning of the play, already like 30 years have passed from the actual beginning of what happened. And so, but Oedipus, remember, doesn't know any of that. He does not know he was abandoned as a baby. He does not know what the oracle had said about Laius and Jocasta and what they had done. He doesn't know any of that background. Okay. All he knows is that he is going to stay in Thebes because he wants to never hurt his dad and mom back in Corinth. That's all he's lived by. And he married his wife, and they've been pretty happy. But now there's a pestilence and they don't know why. So what Oedipus does is he comes out, and these speeches are much longer than most of our dialogue that we're used to today. And yet it's this formal idea. And through the course of the play, the goal of the play is where essentially it's going to cover all of his life to the point where he understands exactly what did happen. All of that history I just went over, he figures out through the course of the play by talking to different people. And it makes him more and more aware. He gets closer and closer and closer to his horrific awareness and understanding that he has done some horrific things without even realizing it. He has committed sins that he will never mentally or physically recover from. And that's the basis of this tragedy. He did them unknowing. And that's really important. He did not know what he was doing. And yet, what he has done is to him and to most Greeks at the time, and to most of us too, an abomination. It's gross. It's genetically weird. It's creepy. It's incestuous. It's got lots of bad stuff. None of it was intentional, but for the Greeks, it didn't matter. Intent meant nothing. And part of the reason he's suffering is because he tried to do something that humans aren't supposed to do. He tried to escape his fate. Had he not, had he read his fate, gone to the oracle and the oracle said, you'll kill your father and marry your mother, he'd go, that's not going to happen. I love my mom and dad. He would have gone back to Corinth and just lived with them and been fine. But because he tries to escape that fate by running away from Corinth, he runs right into Thebes, where his actual mom and dad are. And that's when the bad things happen. At the same time, had Laius and Jocasta kept their son and not abandoned him out in the wilderness to die, he would have just been raised by them, and he wouldn't have killed his father and married his mother. He would have known who they were. So in some ways, both of them, both Laius and Jocasta and Oedipus, they all ended up making a huge mistake because they tried to fight their fate. And their actions on both sides is what these actions made this fate happen. Without their actions, this fate would not have been possible. And so it's almost like the oracle knew and the gods knew. By sharing this truth, they were actually going to drive them even closer to their fate. And so it's sort of a trick. And for the Greeks, a lot of gods just play with humans. Mortals aren't, important. They're just like little play toys. And so they do things that are often cruel, and they make people's lives cruel and awful, even though the people didn't really necessarily deserve it. Now, you can definitely argue that Oedipus, probably far less than Laius and Jocasta, deserves the fate. But Laius and Jocasta both did something they should never, they attempted infanticide, to kill their own child. And most of us aren't really sympathetic with that. And so, but at the same time too, Oedipus did kill a man and his servants on the crossroads, and that murder wasn't good either. So did they do wrong things? Yes. But did they do wrong things? Yes. But did they deserve this level of disgusting, understanding? No, probably not. Well, at least Oedipus probably didn't. He is a sympathetic figure. So essentially what happens is, this is him, the whole process of the play, the hour and a half or whatever, is him unraveling all of the secrets and figuring out exactly what has been done. So it has to be set upon, though. He has to be started to do this. So, and that's what happens. These suppliants come in, they go, oh, we really need you to help. And so Oedipus comes out and he goes, why are you guys here praying with me? He says, wherefore thus with bended knee press ye upon us? In other words, why are you coming as suppliants to the palace? Okay. Why is everybody so sad? And he says, he goes, I know that you're here. And he praises himself, world honored Oedipus, which is a little weird. But he says, he goes, what is it? What's wrong? What do you want? And the priest speaks for everyone. And he says, look, we have all these bad stuff. These bad things are going. And the way we're all suffering because everything is a mess. Okay. So, and that's everything, we're all suffering death. Our ships aren't sailing, our herds and, essentially the fruitless buds of the earth. So, the crops aren't growing, the herds are dying, women are dying, and there's some reason. Now, for the Greeks, if a pestilence happens, if, like COVID runs through a community, it's because some God is getting revenge for something. The bad things happen for a reason. The gods are behind it. And they're usually angry because somebody did or said something that they shouldn't have done. So this is typical Greek thinking at the time. And so they said, we need to know, we're here because you helped us once. You remember you solved the riddle of the Sphinx, and we need you to help us again. So it says, thou walkest and by converse with the blessed, who came to Thebes so swift and swept away the Sphinx's song. So you came and solved the riddle of the Sphinx, and the Sphinx left. And so we need your help again. We lay our grief on thy head, if thou find us not some aid. In other words, if you can't solve this, then our lives are on your head, because he's the king. It's the king's job to solve the problems. Okay. And so that's what he's saying. He says, you need to be our savior again. Please. Now he does say please, sort of. They're counting on him. And so Oedipus says, he goes, I knew what was going on. So, and this is the whole point of keeping it in that unity of time. He says, I've already sent someone to the oracle at Delphi. Okay. And that was Creon, his brother-in-law, Jocasta's brother. And that's going to be important because Creon he's going to figure later on. But he says, I've already sent him to the oracle at Delphi. So he's already made the journey. He should be coming back. And essentially they're going to ask, what is it that we need to do to save Thebes? Okay. And he says, and the lapse of days reckoned, I can but marvel what delays his journey. In other words, he should be back by now. And then, of course, he says that, and then the priest says, I think I see him. Is that not Creon drawing near? And so it's very formalistic. It's going to strike you as odd because we're used to movies, that are much more realistic. But anyway, so Oedipus, yes, Creon does come, and you'll notice Oedipus and the priest talk, and Creon is coming, and then from a distance, Oedipus actually yells to him, hey, what message from the god? A message of joy. He says, I tell thee, what is our worst annoy? If the right deed be done, shall turn to the good. In other words, if Creon tells us what we need to do, we're going to be able to solve this problem. And you'll notice from this point, so the priest spoke here, then it goes to Oedipus, Creon, and then he enters, and then Oedipus, Creon, Oedipus, Creon. So back, it's dialogue again. But the priest he might be standing there, he's not talking. So it's just Creon and Oedipus. Sometimes we call this a French scene, because the French, that's what they called it. They had scenes, and a scene changed every time somebody left the stage or came onto the stage. And so that's kind of what happened. Creon comes on the stage. The priest is still standing there, but he no longer speaks. It's just Creon and Oedipus speaking back and forth. Okay, now, once they talk, he says, okay, did you find out what Phoebus Apollo said? Because Apollo is over the oracle. And he goes, actually, yeah. He says, so I asked. He goes, and he says, essentially, there was an old king Laius of Thebes before you came, and then became our king. He goes, yeah, but he goes, I know, not that I ever saw his face. Now there's irony already there, because most of the audience would know Oedipus not only saw Laius's face, even though he didn't recognize him, but he killed Laius because he was on the crossroads and Laius attacked him and his servants attacked him. And Creon's like, he goes, yeah, I know that Laius was the former king, but I never met him. And Creon's like, okay, but yeah, he was the king beforehand, but he was killed. And he says, and that's what he's saying. He says, essentially, what the gods have decided, what the oracle of Delphi has said, we need to smite the unknown workers of his fall. We need to find the people who murdered Laius and either punish them, kill them, execute them, whatever it takes. But we have to punish. They have to be punished for their crime. And Oedipus is like, well, where on God's earth are they? And how in the world did we not solve this crime 25 years ago? Because remember, this is a long time ago. And he says, he said in Thebes, the person's still there. That which men seek amain they find. In other words, if we look for the king killer here, the murderers of Laius, we will find them, because the murderers are here in Thebes. And so essentially he said, well, where did Laius even meet where did he meet up with his fate? Where was he killed? And he says he was actually on the road to Delphi to ask. Essentially, he was gonna talk to the oracle, and so he went off towards Delphi, but he never came back. And the only thing that happened is, we know that the king was slain, and we know that servants were slain, because the one servant who survived ran back and told everyone. But he didn't remember much, the servant who came back. And he's like, what? He says, but we need to talk to that person. He says that the one servant said that they were set upon by robbers, so a band of people. And they barred the road and then slew the servants and Laius. And he goes, how could you let that go? And of course, they didn't go and solve the murder, because by the time they even knew it had happened, the Sphinx was there dominating Thebes and torturing people. And so he even says, why did you not go and figure out who did it and go search and find these people? And he says, well, by then the Sphinx was here. We didn't have time to take care of him, because we were busy trying to survive. And so Oedipus says, okay, what we're going to do, I'm going to figure out, I'll solve this problem. I'm going to solve the crime. And it's funny, because he says, okay, we have to get rid of this person. And so he kind of swears, whoever it was that slew Laius, the same wild hand may seek me too. Because he's saying, if somebody killed this king, they could come, if they're still living here in Thebes, they could kill me too. What he doesn't know is that he's the one who killed Laius, and he couldn't, but could he kill himself? Yeah, I mean, technically he could. And he goes, and if I care for what happened to Laius, I'm just caring for myself too. And so he's essentially saying, he goes, I vow, 'tis my vow to uphold them to the end. So I'm going to help my country, my little kingship, the city of Thebes, by finding the killer. Okay. And then here comes the chorus, and the priest starts talking, but then the chorus chants, and they're probably chanting in unison prayers to Athena, Artemis, Apollo, and they keep they give you a little sidebar saying this is what they're talking about. Do the chorus parts really matter? The only play I can say that they really did matter to anything was in the play Medea. The chorus is women, and so they're very reactive to the things that are happening to her and the things that she does in response. And it's a very interesting chorus, but mostly the chorus is just praying. Oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Who could have killed the king? Will the king be able to, can the gods help Oedipus solve this problem? Okay. And so they have this kind of interact, and then Oedipus comes back on, and essentially he says, he makes a promise. He goes, even though he says, yes, I came from a long way away, but I am a Theban. I am one of you. And so I proclaim, as king of Thebes, if any here doth know who killed Laius, I charge him that he bring his knowledge to me. Like, if you know anything about, like, it's kind of like the, call 800, this number, if you have any knowledge of the crime against so-and-so, or if you know where we can find this perpetrator of this crime, stuff like that. So call 888, blah, blah, blah. Well, he's doing the same thing. If you're going to come, I mean, if you know anything about this, you need to come up and tell me. And if you do know something and you don't say something, then you are as guilty as the person who did the murdering. And he's kind of harsh about it. He says, I know some of you guys know something, and you're not telling me. He says, but if there's a person who was the murderer, the people who killed Laius, if anybody he decrees, essentially, if anybody harbors him, greets him, shelters them, gives them even water to drink, or does anything to help them, you don't understand. You are essentially harboring the curse on this land. So you need to not do that. And he essentially says, and if you're the murderer listening today, I will find you. Be it one hiding alone or more in unison, I speak on him this curse. Even as his soul is foul within him, let his days be foul, and life unfriended grind him till he die. If he ever tread my hearth, and I know it, be every curse upon my head that I have spoke this day. In other words, if I allow him to exist, I am cursed. So he's saying, I promise. This whole thing is a promise. I am going to find the man who slew Labdacus's son is Laius. And of course, they do all these sons. So we have Cadmus, and actually it goes way back. So Agenor begat Cadmus, begat Polydor, begat Labdacus, begat Laius. Of course, he doesn't know that he's the next in line, that Laius had him, Oedipus. And he says, I will find him, and I will either send him away, essentially chuck him, make him exiled, or I will kill him. But we will take care of this murderer. And the leader of the chorus says, well, but Phoebus told you, Phoebus Apollo said, okay, you have to find the killer, but let Phoebus read its meaning and reveal who did it. So he's like, if the god Apollo is telling you need to find Laius's killer and take care of him, well, you need to ask Apollo who the guy is. Don't we need to know who it is? If the god knows that he's still alive and living here in Thebes and unpunished, surely he knows who it is and he can tell us. And Oedipus is like, well, you can't make a god tell you what happened. And the truth is the Oracle at Delphi is notorious for not giving us all the information we need. And the leader's like, but it would help. And Oedipus is like, that's true. And the leader says, I know somebody who is a seer. He's a priest of Apollo. And Apollo had that kind of gift of foresight. He could see the future. And his name is Tiresias. He's a blind man and he's a seer, but he's the best. He's like, the best psychic ever. And why don't we ask him to tell us? And he says, okay. He says, I had that same thought. That's what Oedipus says. That also have I thought for. In other words, I was thinking that too. And I already sent 2 heralds to go get him. So again, we're speeding up the plot. Oh, we can't wait an hour while he goes and has people fetch Tiresias. I already sent for him. So he should be here any second. And he says, okay, well, while we're waiting for him, he goes, is there anything that you remember? And the leader says, well, I remembered some travelers slew him. That was the tale. And Oedipus is like, well, there was a witness. Do you know where he is? And he goes, I don't know that the man will come forward. I think he'd be afraid of what you threaten. And the leader says, well, I think I know somebody who can find him. But then here's Tiresias, and boing, 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 he comes in. Now, Tiresias and Oedipus, it's such a fascinating discussion. So we remember, Oedipus leader, Oedipus, and then Tiresias comes in. And then it's Oedipus Tiresias, back and forth. So again, we do the same dialogue thing. I'm just going to point that out so that if I ever ask you a question, you'll see that it's actually in practice. This is how it happens. Okay, so Oedipus comes in, tells him the whole story, essentially. Says, this is what Phoebus is looking for. He wants to find out who smote Laius, our ancient king. So please tell me. Save our city, save thine own greatness, save me, save all that yet doth groan under the dead man's wrong. Tell me who committed this murder. Okay. Now Tiresias knows the answer. And he also knows exactly how Oedipus is going to take it when he tells him. And so he doesn't want to tell him. He even says to himself, this is like an aside, he goes, ah me, a fearful thing is knowledge, when to know helpeth no end. I knew the answer, but I knew I couldn't tell him. And Oedipus notices he doesn't want to answer. And he goes, why are you, what's up, why are you, comest thou so deep in gloom? Like, why are you upset? And Tiresias is like, I need to go home. You take care of your job, I'll go take care of mine. And Oedipus is like, no, 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 no. Thebes feeds you, so you can't hide when we need you. And he tries to leave, and Oedipus actually gets in his way. And he says, no, if you know something, you are not going to leave. Please. And he begs Tiresias. And Tiresias doesn't want to tell him because he says, all without light. When he says that, there's this idea of blindness and light, being able to see. Remember, Tiresias is blind. Oedipus is not. He can see. And yet Oedipus can't see. He doesn't know the truth about what happened. And Tiresias does. He sees all of it. And yet he knows, everything Oedipus says is because he is ignorant. He can't see. He is living in darkness because he doesn't know the truth. And so truth and light, think about those things, knowledge, awareness, sight, those are all those things that one has or doesn't have. And Tiresias has them, and yet Oedipus doesn't. But Oedipus, because he can physically see, and Tiresias is blind, he thinks he knows everything, and Tiresias knows nothing, when in reality he is absolutely and utterly wrong. Tiresias really can see, and Oedipus really can't. And so Tiresias tries to stop him, tries to not tell him. He says, I will not speak. And Oedipus tears into him. And he's essentially, oh, you're hiding something, you're lying to me, blah blah blah. And Tiresias says, stop. And I'm not gonna tell you. And he even says, however I hold it, even if I don't tell you, you will find out. And so Oedipus is like, great, so tell me. And he goes, nope, nope. And he's going to go again. And Oedipus tries to stop, and he becomes so angry. And then Oedipus essentially says, you won't tell me because you are the murderer. I know you're blind. Otherwise, I would swear you're the murderer. And Tiresias is like, oh, so I'm blind? You don't know. He says, he goes, I command thee by thine own word's power to stand accursed. So essentially, he curses him. And don't ever speak to me again. You are yourself the unclean thing. So he says, don't call me a murderer. You're the murderer, Oedipus. And he goes, why in the world would you say that? Oh, so you think you can call me names and then go free? Like, I'll put you in prison for calling me the murderer. And Tiresias says, I am free. But you asked, and so I told you. And Oedipus is like, I don't understand. And he goes, my words were pretty plain. You're the one. And he goes, no, I don't understand. Oedipus said, because he can't fathom that Tiresias is telling him that he killed Laius, the king. And so he says, I don't understand what you're saying. And Tiresias says, thou seekest this man of blood, the murderer. Thyself art he. In other words, you're the murderer. You did it. And he goes, oh, you're calling me the murderer? And he, of course, Oedipus believes he isn't. Absolutely sure he never did anything to Laius. He never met Laius, never saw him, never interacted with him, and he absolutely wasn't in a band of robbers, and he didn't kill a king. And so, and then he even says, he goes, Tiresias says, I'm just speaking the truth. And Oedipus says, that's not the truth. You have no part with truth. You're a blind man. Blind eyes, ears, and heart. You can't see anything. You don't know truth. So he and criticizes Tiresias, and he goes, oh, really? He goes, I'm blind. He says, just wait, and you will see how blind you are. And he says, Creon, is this, and he actually looks at his brother on the line. He says, did you plot this to send Tiresias here to claim I'm the murderer? And Tiresias says, whoa, whoa, whoa. He says, you're your own enemy, Oedipus. Creon doesn't hate you. And he goes, oh, really? And so essentially what he says, he claims, this is what Oedipus decides, is that Creon has sent Tiresias here to attack him so that Creon can take the throne. And he's just absolutely certain, okay, this is why Tiresias is telling me all this, that I'm the murderer, because he wants to take the throne from me. And so Tiresias is going to destroy my good name, claim that I'm the murderer that I'm not. And then Tiresias is going to help him get the throne from me. And Tiresias says, you have no idea what's going on. He goes, I don't obey Creon. I only obey the Lord Apollo. He says, I'm blind and you have mocked my blindness, but let me speak now. And this is where Tiresias, he's had it. Remember, he didn't want to tell him anything. And he says, he goes, you have eyes hast thou, but thy deeds thou canst not see, nor where thou art, nor what things dwell with thee. Whence art thou born? You don't know. And unknown on quick and dead, on the quick, the living and the dead, on all that were thine own, thou hast wrought hate. For across thy path rising, a mother and father's wrath, that's Laius and Jocasta, two-handed, shod with fire from the haunts of men, shall scourge thee. In thine eyes now light, but then darkness. In other words, you will go blind, which is actually what happens. But he's saying, he goes, you don't know what's really going on. You don't know where you came from. You don't know who your parents are. He says, but you will see it. Thou seest not now, which so soon shall lay thee low. Low as thyself, low as thy children. Go ahead, go criticize Creon. Go criticize me. It doesn't make any difference. It's all going to be, you're going to realize that this is all on you. And Oedipus essentially wants to attack him, and the leader has to stop him from physically attacking a blind man. And he tells him to go, Tiresias to leave. And Tiresias is like, look, I wouldn't have come if you hadn't told me to come. You sent for me. And Oedipus says, I wouldn't have called for you if I'd known you were so dark a fool. And he goes, oh, I'm the fool? Really? And Oedipus is like, oh, so you think you're wise? Well, go ahead and speak your prophecies. And he says, this is Tiresias, this is laying on of doom. This day shall give thee birth and blot thee out. You will figure out who your parents are, your parentage, your family, and it will destroy you. And Oedipus says, well, I've saved this land and I care not if I die. He says, then I will go. And he finally turns back to Oedipus. He goes, once gone, he will not vex me more. That's what Oedipus tells him. He goes, I don't fear you. I fear thee not, nor will I go before that word be spoken which I came to speak. He goes, you seek with threats and loud proclaim the man whose hand slew Laius. So you're threatening the person who slew Laius. Lo, I tell thee, he doth stand here. He's called a stranger. But these days shall prove him Theban true. So in other words, but he is a person of Thebes. He was born in Thebes, and he will not praise his birthright. Blind, who once had seeing eyes, so he will go blind. He will be beggared. He will lose everything. Who once had riches, his staff groping before him, he shall crawl o'er the unknown earth, and voices round him called, behold, the brother father of his own children, the seed, the sower, and the sown, shame to his mother's blood, and to his sire, son, murderer, incest worker. he tells him, they will mock you as brother, father, son, murderer, incestuous, all bad. So he tells him very clearly, this is what you're going to find out once today's over. This is what is going to be your fate, and you will discover all this. And Tiresias is absolutely right. Okay, now we're going to have to stop here and we'll come back to this tomorrow. But we'll start with Creon entering back, because he's got to convince Oedipus that he didn't actually do anything. But that's all we're going to do for today. And I'll just put this once I hit the recording. And once it takes about an hour to get recorded, so I'll post it later on today. But it will just, I'll always have part 1, part 2, things like that. So, and I'll try to always keep the recordings about an hour. So even if nobody shows up, I'll try to just record for an hour. And if you have questions, remember, after you watch this, make sure you ask me questions. I'll see you guys later.